Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. Sorry it's been a while since I last uploaded. I have almost finished my honours and so it is getting exhausting and kind of brutal, and I'm very much looking forward to a holiday. But in the meantime, I really wanted to make this particular video, so I thought I would jump on and share some of the insights that I have had recently. For those of you who are familiar with the channel, you know that it's been like an interesting last year or so, and yeah, I've learned a few things from that particular journey. And that's why today we are talking about re-traumatization from the church. Because unfortunately, that is a thing. But in order to talk about re-traumatization in the church, we need to talk about some very key aspects of that, which is gaslighting and invalidation. And the reason why we need to talk about that is because this is what makes people most vulnerable to being re-traumatized in the church. A lot of people don't understand that gaslighting is pretty much the foundation of complex PTSD. Without gaslighting, I don't think PTSD would exist. Lots of people have traumatic experiences and recover from it without developing PTSD. So, you know, they've done studies of people who have been through the same event or like the same war zone or things like that, and kind of looked into who developed PTSD and who didn't. And the number one difference between them is the social environment that those people are part of. So gaslighting is the number one tool of an abuser, and it's the number one tool because it's very effective at exerting control. And control is the main aim of an abuser. They want to be able to dictate how they treat people. They want to ensure that they are never essentially held accountable in any way. They want to operate in a level of darkness and lies and secrecy so that they can maintain a false, like, external image to most people. So control is everything to an abuser, and they will do literally anything to get it. They will use threats, they will use physical restraint, they will use coercion, and the most effective way to sort of get away with these behaviors is through gaslighting, because it essentially changes their victims' brains. If you're not familiar with what the term gaslight actually means, it's sort of coined from an old film, like from the 1930s, where you know, they still had piped gas, which was used for house lighting, and you can also still see some gas lights in operation in London, which is kind of cool. But yeah, they used to pipe in gas to people's homes, and you would like essentially turn on the gas and light the light, and you could adjust the gas flow for different levels of light, like a dimmer. Obviously this technology did not last that long and was eventually replaced with electricity, but during that time there was this film made, and the whole premise of the film was that this guy was adjusting the lighting in his house to drive his wife insane. And he would adjust the lighting so that it was dimmer, and then she would remark on it and he would be like, "Oh, I don't see any difference, what are you talking about?" And that's essentially what gaslighting is. It's denying another person's perception of reality and telling them that they're wrong. Usually in the context of an abusive relationship, gaslighting is used to invalidate someone else's feelings, someone else's experiences, basically say, "I never did that, I don't know what you're talking about, you have no right to feel any particular way about what I did to you because I didn't do it." And and even if I did do it, you deserved it in some way, shape or form. So that's what gaslighting is designed to do. It's designed to undermine the other person's perception of reality so that they cannot trust their own mind. If the victim cannot trust their own mind, then usually what happens is they have to refer to the abuser to find out what is reality. And that obviously gives the abuser ultimate control, because they can determine what the other person is allowed to experience in terms of reality. The other thing that an abuser will do is they will also discredit their victim, and gaslighting is part of that. So they use gaslighting to make their victim as crazy as possible, as emotionally distraught as possible, and flustered and feeling out of control, so that that person looks crazy to everyone else. And then the abuser whispers in other people's ears and is like, yeah, you can't trust her because she's crazy, or he's crazy, you know, depending on who the victim is. So gaslighting is used to provoke the victims into acting in a way that's out of character for them, because they are distraught. They are spinning out. They have no idea what to believe. They can't trust themselves. They are freaking out, and that's exactly how their abuser wants it. The other function of gaslighting is to ensure that the victim doesn't talk to other people. Because if the victim isn't sure what reality actually is, then they're less likely to discuss it with other people, because they don't want to look crazy. They don't want to seem like they, you know, don't know what's real and what isn't real. So this contributes to the victim's feeling of isolation, where they don't feel like they can really talk to anyone. They don't feel like they can share what they're experiencing, because they don't even know if they're experiencing it. They're not sure if they're overreacting. They're not sure if they actually interpreted things correctly. So they might have an experience and they remember it, but they don't know how to talk about it to anyone. And since the only person who is allowed to interpret what reality is the abuser, of course the abuser is not going to green light their victim to say, oh yeah, I assaulted you, or I stole money from you, or things like that. And so this is one of the most damaging and long-lasting effects of gaslighting on the victim, is they don't trust their own mind, they don't trust their own perception of reality, and they're constantly looking for reassurance and for validation from external sources, because they feel like they have to have validation from external sources. If they don't get it from an external source, then it's not valid. Like, their entire trauma history is not valid unless other people say it is. Which you can probably imagine puts that person in an incredibly vulnerable state, because they're at the mercy of other people. They're at the mercy of whether other people are going to validate them or not. Obviously, their abuser was never going to validate them. That's never going to happen. An abuser's never going to admit what they did. They deny it until they're blue in the face. And they're never going to apologize to their victims. They're never going to affirm what their victims experienced. They're always going to minimize, invalidate, deny, or justify what they did. Because to do anything else would be to relinquish their control. They have to have the at least illusion of control, even if it's not actually real. So what happens to the victim after they have escaped from abuse? They try to get validation from as many people as possible. They try to tell as many people as possible. Most people don't believe them, because the abuser has already laid the groundwork of, you know, undermining the credibility of their victim. So the victim's friends, their family, their co-workers, literally everyone in their life is more than likely just going to deny the truth, because they don't know what the truth is. There might be a few people who believe them and support them, but it never quite feels like enough, even if there are a few people. And usually the person who's likely to believe them the most is a therapist who is familiar with abusers. It's often hard for people who have never experienced abuse to believe that someone that they know is a perpetrator. They don't think that that's possible. It's something that their mind automatically rejects. They don't want to live in that kind of reality. They want to pretend that they are always safe and that nothing bad can possibly happen to them. But for the victim, not being believed is just as traumatizing as what actually happened to them. So every time they tell someone and that person doesn't believe them, or that person minimizes it in some way or invalidates it in some way, the victim is re-traumatized over and over and over and over and over again. So as you can probably imagine, if a victim of gaslighting is part of a church or joins a church at some point after that or during that, they are extremely vulnerable to being re-traumatized. And unfortunately, I don't think there are many churches that understand this or have any concept of this whatsoever. The church that I was going to, like last year, they were constantly bragging about how they were trauma-informed, but they don't even know what that means. Like, they had no clue. One example of how clueless they were was one of the pastors was surprised when I let him know that I couldn't pray with my eyes closed during their services because they would randomly like dim the lights during prayer. And so what would happen was I would be praying with my eyes closed and the lights would dim, and all of a sudden I'd be like, "Huh!" And I would just immediately react, because with my eyes closed, when the lights are dimmed or shut off, it looks like someone is suddenly in front of me and I'm about to be attacked. And like, I don't have, you know, a conscious thought about that. I just have an immediate knee-jerk reaction, which is, huh! And so they were like, oh, is that a thing? Oh, I had no idea. And I was like, yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, if you have someone in your church who has been physically attacked in the past, they're probably going to have a reaction, or they're just not going to be able to pray with their eyes closed. So they said they were trauma-informed, but they don't actually know that much about trauma, like at all. And so I didn't really feel that, I guess, comfortable there, or maybe I just didn't really feel safe there. I didn't always feel like I fitted in, and maybe that was sort of a theological or cultural difference, maybe all of the above. But that church did end up re-traumatizing me, because there was a relatively minor incident which I talked about in a previous video about seeker-sensitive churches. And that incident could have just like not really been that big of a deal if it hadn't been for one of the pastors like contacting me later on that day, and then like 2 days later ringing me and like basically for the sole purpose of invalidating all of my experiences. Like in particular, he was trying to invalidate what had happened in that particular incident, but in the same sort of rant that he was going on about, because he pretended to ask like, oh, how are you doing? but then launched into this tirade about like how I don't know what it's like to be traumatized and how I can't imagine what someone else is going through. So he completely invalidated not just that experience, but like all of my trauma from like my entire life. He just like invalidated the whole lot. And it sent me into a massive downward spiral. Like I couldn't sleep. I was crying all the time. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I had this overwhelming urge to like flee the state. And yeah, it took about 6 months to actually have a decent night's sleep. Which is actually kind of crazy if I think about it, because like, why would I put so much emphasis on the opinion of an idiot? Like, he had no idea what he was talking about. Had absolutely no clue what he was referring to whatsoever. He was just spouting off some crap and thinking that he was doing such a good job. Why did the opinion of a moron make me so like re-traumatized? And I can tell you, I had a breakthrough in, you know, the recent months after recovering from that particular incident. And yeah, I thought I would share that insight because it's helpful in making sure it doesn't happen again, and also recovering from and part of the healing of PTSD. And the epiphany that I had was this: my brain is still in a gaslit state. That's essentially what it is. My brain is still completely dependent on external validation for affirmation of reality. And if I can't get it, then I am just spiraling. That is how powerful gaslighting is as a control mechanism. It doesn't just make people doubt things in the moment. It doesn't just make particular instances, you know, open to interpretation. It's not that. It actually retrains the person's brain to not trust their own perception and to always need an external source of validation. And even if, like myself, I've got a few people who affirm my reality and who believe me and all of that stuff, and who were either there or like know enough about the circumstances to go, yeah, you're not crazy, like you're not making it up. But it just never really seems to be enough, and that's a gaslit brain. That's what it does to you. It's never enough to just know what is real. You just can't. And that leaves the individual in a very vulnerable state. They're always at the mercy of whoever might deny their reality at any given moment, like that dickhead from the church. And while I don't generally swear in especially this channel, I think that's an accurate description. So the real question becomes, how do you get your brain out of a gaslit state? And that is the tricky part. And it's not a quick fix, because I mean, I thought I was out of a gaslit state. I thought that I was doing a lot better with my PTSD, and in general I am. Like, it's definitely a lot better than it has been. But there are still times and moments when, you know, the opinions of others weigh far too heavily. And the Bible warns us against that. The Bible says, you know, don't seek to please man, seek to please God. And it's because if you rely on man, I mean, first of all, they're idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not necessarily smarter than you. And second of all, they're self-serving. They do things out of their own selfish self-preservation or ambition or goals or whatever. You don't know what they're really wanting to get out of saying certain things to you for. So according to the evidence-based, research, the first step is awareness. If you're aware that your brain is in a gaslit state and that it is vulnerable to these sorts of things, then when it happens, you can be like, my brain's doing that thing again. And at that point, it's really important to bring the value of other people's opinions down a notch. Like, if you have to, refer to them as morons, because chances are it's true. It's always important to keep in mind that you can't necessarily trust where someone else is trying to lead you. You have to have, first of all, more trust in your own perception, but also more information about what is real and what is not real, and that's where biblical literacy comes into things. So the only person whose opinion matters is God's. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. God's is the only opinion that matters. But of course, there are lots of people who claim to speak on behalf of God and to teach God's word, and those people can't be trusted, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that you can't learn from different people, and it doesn't mean that you can't listen to different, opinions and teachings and stuff. But you always need to take it with a grain of salt. Never place implicit trust in another human being. I mean, there are some people that you can find over time that you are able to trust more and more. Like my husband, for example, I am fairly confident that I can trust him, but I know that he's, not infallible. He's gonna make mistakes at different times. So, we have a relationship where the other person can say to someone, not sure about that idea. But the thing that is most important is to have biblical literacy. The number one thing that really bad churches and cults rely on is people's ignorance. So if you're better informed, then you're able to discern things better for yourself and to trust that you understand and have a decent perception of reality. We're never going to have a perfect perception of reality. That's not possible from the vantage point of a limited human experience. But it's the same for everyone. So there's no one out there who is going to give you a perfect perception of reality. They haven't had your experiences, they don't have your knowledge, they do not know your whole history or everything that you feel. So their opinion is not valid in that particular instance. When it comes to your emotions, your personal experiences, nobody else's opinion is valid. You need to remind yourself that the only person whose opinions is valid is your own. If people are talking about theological concepts or history or external type stuff, sure, they might know more than you, they might be better informed, they might have thought about it in a way that you haven't thought about it before. That's great. Learn from that person. But when it comes to your own feelings, your own experiences, etc., their opinions are not valid. And the last thing is you need to start trusting your own perception of reality and operating from there. Don't ask for other people's opinions. Don't, share your experiences with them, because chances are they're not safe people. And if you share your experiences, they're just going to invalidate them and make you feel worse. Or if you do share your experiences with them, it's just to inform them about what you're going through. It's not to get validation, it's not to get reassurance. Because if you're still seeking validation and reassurance, not insurance, from other people, then you're always going to be vulnerable. So you need to start validating yourself. and your own perceptions of what happened to you and your own story and your own feelings, and you need to maybe make that a regular practice and just say, you know, that happened, that was real, no one can take that from me and no one can tell me otherwise. And if people want to argue with you about stuff, just reiterate that is their perception. Their perception is faulty and flawed as much as anyone else's. They are never going to be perfect, and so you don't have to take their opinion on board. You don't have to accept someone else's perception of reality. You can just be like, well, thanks for sharing your experience, but that's not my experience. My experience is different, and your experience does not invalidate my experience. Sometimes experiences can be recontextualized or reframed in some way, and that can be helpful, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean that you didn't feel a certain way about it. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. Just a bit of a short one from me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hopefully you're all doing well, and we will be able to get back into the book of Daniel very soon and finish that off because we're so close to the end. If you haven't joined the channel yet, then hit the subscribe, like and share, and I will see you next time. Take care, God bless, bye.